everyone. Welcome to the December 27th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona. My usual co-host Craig Milkowski is still on vacation. He took a few weeks break for the holidays. He'll be back in the new year, 2022. But I've been excited to have some guests join me on this podcast over the past several weeks. And today I'm excited to have on Daily Racing Form's California handicapper Brad Free. And Brad, welcome to the podcast. And we're coming off opening day at Santa Anita. It was an excellent card, a little bit disappointing with the weather in the California area and races being taken off the turf, but we saw at least one very special performance among the scheduled dirt races.
Well, opening day at Santa Anita is one of the special days of the year in California, and you're right. You're referring to Flightline, of course, the brilliant son of Tapit, who crushed the Malibu Stakes by more than 11 lengths. It was a little bit disappointing on opening day. The 11-race card had 6 races scheduled for grass. It's been a pretty wet week out in California, more than 3.5 inches of rain in Arcadia, and Santa Anita made the decision on early Sunday morning to take all 6 grass races and push them over to the main track, including a race that is relatively significant, the Grade 1 American Oak. So you kind of feel some compassion for the 3-year-old fillies that were looking forward to running 1.25 miles on grass in the American Oaks, but instead they had to run on the main track, and I think that compromised the favorites' performance chances. But anyway, we'll talk more about that. It was a fun day of racing at Santa Anita on Sunday, and some very impressive performances by a couple of relatively lightly raced 3-year-olds beyond the Flightline's performance in the Malibu.
Yeah, it was an unfortunate situation with those turf races. I know that there was some chatter about why couldn't they have postponed these races or canceled and rescheduled them. I think it's difficult. A lot of these races on the turf were scheduled for 3-year-olds, and we're at the very end of the year. If you run them next week, I guess you have to race them for 4-year-old restricted races, which you don't really do anymore. I mean, I do think it's a credit to the connections that they kept a lot of these turf horses in and allowed them to compete on the dirt. So many of these races, especially the American Oaks, they really did hold together. Just a lot of these turf horses, as you would expect, didn't really handle the main track. But we'll get to those off the turf races in a little bit. Brad, I do think it makes sense to just start with the feature race with Flightline. This was a really special performance, and I can only imagine what it was like to witness it in person.
Well, I mean, Flightline, we knew he was a fast horse. We knew he was a good horse. I mean, not too many horses break into the game with Beyer speed figures of 105 and 114. Flightline entered the Malibu Stakes as the overwhelming favorite. Most people expected him to win in front-running fashion, but what he delivered was nothing short of freaky. I mean, he set the pace. He was long gone. He won by more than 11 lengths, and one of my favorite shots of opening day at Santa Anita was watching the head-on of the stretch run, and at about the 8th pole, Flavien Prat is sitting motionless on Flightline, and he kind of takes a peek over his right shoulder like, where is everyone? And they were off in the distance, and Pratt was sitting motionless. Flightline dominated by more than 11 lengths. He went 7 furlongs in 121.37. It was a brilliant performance by a very special horse, and it'll be very interesting to see how this horse, how many starts he makes next year in the year 2022, how far he can carry his speed. But you don't see too many horses do what Flightline has done so far in his career. And this is one very special horse. He has a top jockey aboard in Flavien Prat. And John Sadler has, in my opinion, been a mastermind behind the scenes. I know maybe it's easier to train a top horse, but he resisted the temptation to run him in the Breeders' Cup Sprint when everybody said that it was a race he could win. And I agree, on numbers he could have won. But Sadler recognizes the toll that a fast performance takes on a racehorse. And so he decided to skip the Breeders' Cup, point for the Malibu in his backyard, and we saw the results on Sunday afternoon. A dominating performance by Flightline, winning by more than 11 lengths.
No, I mean, I know there was some frustration around the horse's just lack of activity this year since he made that impressive debut, I believe, all the way back in April. But when he puts forth performances like this on the days that he does show up, it's hard to argue with John Sadler's methods with this horse. I mean, and comparing him to other horses that have been this fast, I think it's really hard to find corollaries from the past for horses to compare Flightline to. I mean, we haven't really seen horses that have run this fast and then continued to get faster in their subsequent starts. I mean, people talk about a horse like McLean's Music, who obviously never ran again, but there are other horses that have debuted with triple-digit buyers. I'm thinking of a horse like Discreet Cat, who I think ran a 106 buyer in his debut and then went on to a series of races where he was unchallenged. We haven't seen what the buyer will be for Flightline in the Malibu yet. We were just talking about this a little bit off air. It's going to be very high. It just depends on how high it actually is. This race did go, I believe, 3.41 seconds faster than the La Brea, which was over the same distance. It's going to be interesting to see how the buyer team decides to break up these races if they group them all together. If they do group the La Brea and the Malibu together on the same variant, Flightline's going to get a buyer speed figure that's about 40 points higher than La Brea, which I mean will result in a just gigantic speed figure. But we'll see how they do it. No doubt about it, though. This horse is extremely fast and one of the most exciting horses that I can remember since I've been following the game going back to the late 90s.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Me too. I mean, and one of the cool things about Flightline is the accessibility of his connections. Sadler has been open with the media. You can go back and see this horse at the barn, watch him train. Flavien Prat is very expansive in how Flavien Prat, by the way, is generally a reserved jockey. He doesn't cheerlead the mounts that he rides, but even he's kind of in awe with regards to Flightline. And, it's funny that this horse got a late start, and I think people were wondering, well, why did he not start until he was 3? He had some issues as a 2-year-old. He had an ankle issue that delayed his the start to his career. He also crashed into a fence down in Florida when he was at the Florida farm where he was broken, and he suffered a severe gash on his right hip. And it was an ugly looking wound that required time to heal. He did not even have his first official recorded workout until January of this year. And here we are at the end of the year, and Flightline's winning the Malibu by more than 11 lengths. So this is going to be a very fun horse to watch his career unfold. And I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed that we see, a number of starts out of this horse. One of the things when you see these horses that are this brilliant and this fast, you just wonder how much can their body sustain, because I think there's such a thing as a horse being too fast for his or her own good. And that's one reason why Sadler has managed him so I say conservatively, but sporadically is probably a better term for it. He doesn't run him often, but when he does, we saw the results on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point about hoping this horse stays sound and healthy, and you make a great point about the way that John Sadler has handled him. But people are wondering where we're going to see this horse next and when we're going to see this horse next. And I did see John Sadler say after the race that they will be looking at a 2-turn race for his next start, wherever and whenever that may be, probably a couple months down the line. This is a horse that a lot of people have made much of the fact that he is by Tapit, and you would imagine that he's a horse that has the pedigree and the physical makeup to handle longer distances. His Dan Feathered was a graded stakes winning router, I believe, on the turf. But what you were saying about keeping this horse sound, I think, really is a salient point when it comes to his training, because I think one of the reasons that Flightline hasn't stretched out yet is because he's a horse that's just so hard to slow down in the mornings. And I think that makes him extra hard on himself when he trains hard and races hard. You just want to make sure that these horses don't do too much.
That's exactly right. And Sadler even said before the Malibu Stakes that assuming things go well in the Malibu and he runs well and comes out of the race well, that they do plan to stretch this horse out. I don't know if that opportunity is going to be available out in California. So it'll be interesting to see where he shows up next. And the reason I say that is because the next long distance race for the handicap division is, I think it's in about 6 weeks or so. And as far as Flightline goes, that would be running back on relatively short rest, or you can wait until March and go from 7 furlongs to 1.25 miles in the Santa Anita handicap. Or there are obviously opportunities out of town, even out of the country. So Sadler's going to sit back and see how long it takes Flightline to recover from that performance. And these horses, they do require time after an effort like Flightline produced on Sunday. You can't just run them right back in 3 weeks. He's going to need a little bit of time, and then Sadler will pick the right spot. He's managed him perfectly so far, and we'll see how far he can carry his speed. But a very exciting horse.
Yeah, and before we move on from the Malibu, it should just be mentioned, while Flightline did win this race by over 11 lengths, it's not like the horses that finished behind him are bums. I mean, Baby Yoda had earned a gigantic speed figure at Saratoga. Stiletto Boy is just like the little engine that could. I mean, he gets stakes placings in some major races, and he handled the turn back to 7 furlongs here. Brad, I do think the major disappointment of this race was Dr. Scheibel. I don't know exactly what happened to him. This last place finish is obviously just dashes his Eclipse Award hopes that he was going to be in the conversation for champion sprinter. And I guess that's the risk that you take running again, but something obviously went amiss with him in this race.
Yeah, that was extremely disappointing. And, he was a lot of people's second preference in the race. He was my second preference. And I expected him to maybe provide Flightline with a little bit of a challenge. He was cold in the betting right off the bat. He got banged around a little bit after the start, but after watching the head on a couple times, I really can't say that the trouble is the reason for Dr. Scheibel's lackluster performance. It's the first time in his career that he never fired. He didn't run. He got bumped from both sides soon after the start. No big deal. Made a forward position and then just completely sputtered. So the jockey change from Flavian Pratt to Juan Hernandez did not work to Dr. Scheibel's benefit. It's not like he had a whole lot of racing this year. He only was making the fifth start of 2021. So I don't know what happened to him. It kind of throws the Eclipse Award for champion sprinter up in the air. I don't know who I'm going to vote for at this stage of the game. I was leaning toward Dr. Scheibel, and I might still go that way. I don't know yet. But very disappointing last place performance by Dr. Scheibel as the 7-2 second choice in the betting. With regards to the strength of the Malibu field, I know that everybody's saying, oh, yeah, he beat a really good field. I don't think he did, to be honest with you. I know that Baby Yoda did have that 114 buyer speed figure in a one other than at Saratoga. And yes, Dr. Scheibel is a good sprinter. But after that, Stiletto Boy is kind of just a pick up the pieces type. Triple Tap, who was the third choice in the betting, all he did was win a setup allowance race that fell apart for him over a diseased field. Timeless Bounty from Mahoning Valley. It was not the deepest Malibu field that I have seen. And I'm not taking anything away from Flightline. I'm just recognizing that his main rival did not show up, Dr. Scheibel, and the others they're just horses. And Flightline ran away from them as a good horse should.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to say. If Flightline had not been in this race, I think that's a really good point, that it would have been a very disappointing edition of the Malibu with Baby Yoda and Stiletto Boy battling to the wire. But I guess they're not the worst horses to beat by a dozen lengths if you're going to beat some horses by a dozen lengths. The opposite end of the spectrum from Flightline's performance, obviously, was the Grade 1 La Brea, which unfortunately is probably one of the weaker Grade 1 races that we've seen in 2021. The Bob Baffert other horse, Calypso, coming off a layoff, won this race, even though the Bob Baffert trained favorite Private Mission took all the money, getting bet down to 3-5. Just overall, though, a slow race where really nobody showed up behind the winner.
No, and it's this race, the Grade 1 La Brea for 3-year-old fillies, late January at Santa Anita, for some reason has become an absolute minefield for favorites and a bonanza for long shots. In fact, Private Mission, who was a severe underlay at odds of 3-5, was the seventh consecutive odds-on favorite to lose the La Brea in the last 11 years. So this is a race in which you don't want to take a short price, and especially a horse like Private Mission, whose resume was largely, and reputation is largely based on her good races around two turns.
Mm-hmm.
That was a 7 furlong sprint, the La Brea was. And Private Mission, she got into a little bit of trouble at the break. She dropped out and she completely misfired, as often does happen. The La Brea, year after year after year, it's won by a long shot. Baffert had Calypso ready to roll. She got a great trip, sitting third behind the speed. Johnny Velasquez, who won 4 races on opening day, gave Calypso a sweet ride. swung out and ran away from the field. It's interesting. The final time was horrendous, 124.78. And as you mentioned earlier, David, if the Beyer folks apply the same variant to the La Brea as they do of the Malibu, it's going to be 40 points less than the Malibu. But Calypso won by nearly 5 lengths. And after the wire, she galloped out a mile in front of the field. So from a visual perspective, it was quite an impressive performance. It's tough to, I'm not sure how to resolve the difference between what I saw with my eyes and what I'm looking at the clock, because 124.78 is going to produce a low number for the La Brea. And it was kind of a mishmash of a field as well.
Mhm.
Private Mission, she deserved to be favored. I understand that, but she did not fire, and she's better around 2 turns. Calypso was ready to roll. A smashing performance visually. From a speed figure, final time standpoint, a little bit disappointing.
Yeah, I really echo all of those sentiments. Visually impressive, but you look at the PPs of the second place finisher, Brilliant Cut, who was coming off a 74 Beyer victory in a very weak allowance race, or I should say, starter optional claiming race, and it just makes you wonder about whether this really was much of a field behind her, because her two main rivals, Private Mission and Missy P, who had shown so much ability in her debut, but has just never run back to it, they really just did not back up the support that they got on the tote board. So it might have just been a very weak field that Calypso was beating, and horses can pass the eye test, but the clock is often much more telling. So we'll see how the Beyer folks and other speed figures makers decide to sort all that out. Brad, I do want to get your take on some of the off the turf races. The Grade 1 American Oaks, we'll see if it ends up being a Grade 1. I know that the Graded Stakes Committee always downgrades these races when they're taken off the turf and reassesses things. I was heartened to see that most of the field stayed in this race, and Michael McCarthy just kind of dominated affairs, as he did have two of the horses that had some semblance of dirt breeding, and that came through with Queen Goddess beating nicest.
Yeah, it was good to see a big field, but I would have been disappointed had any other horses scratched. Eddie's New Dream scratched to go in the La Brea, of course. But this is the last chance for these 3-year-old fillies to run in a graded stakes race against their own in their own age group, and so you really had to stay in, even if you had some doubts whether your filly would run on the main track or not. In the case of Going Global, I mean, she clearly was not the same filly that she was on turf. She did make a nice little run on the far turn, and for a brief instant, it looked like she was going to, make an impact, and then she completely flattened out. And after the race, her jockey Flavian Pratt said that she just did not handle the dirt. Queen Goddess loved the dirt. She got out there on the lead and she motored along, and she was long gone. It was quite an impressive performance, and quite a very interesting price, I have to say as well. Like many other handicappers, I picked Going Global, but to me, Queen Goddess was actually the second horse in the race. She ran well last time out in an allowance race against Older. She made the lead a little bit too soon. She was wide every step of the way. And she was no, I'm not saying that she had to win the American Oaks, but she was entering the race on a pattern of good races. And as a daughter of Empire Maker, why shouldn't she handle the main track? And she certainly did. So it was a nice win by Queen Goddess. Nicest, who also was exiting a promising third place finish against Older in a grade 3 turf marathon. She was fit enough to go a mile and 1/4. She was up to finish second and give Michael McCarthy that exacta that came back $86. So a good couple of good fillies. Long-term significance of this race, I think that if anything, it maybe gives McCarthy some options now with Queen Goddess. I don't know how good she is. She was certainly good enough to win the American Oaks. But now moving forward into 2022, McCarthy has the option. Go on grass, go on dirt. It's going to be a smaller field on dirt. We know that time after time, these dirt routes come up with small fields in the filly mare division. So he has options moving forward. Queen Goddess, now a graded stakes winner, and a good solid win, but a little bit not quite a satisfying race due to the surface change. I would have loved it if Santa Anita had taken the first 5 grass races off and moved them to the main track, and at least kept the American Oaks on the surface it was scheduled to run. I understand why they did it. They don't want to beat their turf course to death
Hmm.
on the first day of the season. But it was disappointing that this grade one, which automatically downgraded to a grade two, had to be run on the main track.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. It's disappointing. You wonder how much damage running one turf race really would have done, but like you said, it is the first day of the meet, so you want to keep the course pretty pristine for what's to come with more wet weather in the area. But yeah, it was kind of funny to me that they almost bet this race like it was still on the turf, making Going Global such a heavy favorite when it was such a wild card as to whether she was going to handle the grass or not. I mean, she has all European pedigree, so that was a little surprising to me. And she ran like a horse. That's a turf horse. I mean, she made a menacing move on the far turn, but just flattened out when they got to the quarter pole, which you often see turf horses that run on the dirt. They're able to make a move, but they can't sustain it because they just don't have the stamina over that more demanding dirt surface. So yeah, that Empire Maker influence came through with Queen Goddess as well as Nicest, who is by Empire Maker's grandson, American Pharaoh. So some American dirt pedigree on the top side there for both those Mike McCarthy runners. And they were able to dominate this race. And like you said, not really sure what to make of this as a dirt race, graded stake. I'm not sure these horses really have much of a future on the dirt. I imagine both of them will go back to the turf in the future. The other off the turf races, the Santa Anita Mathis Mile and the San Gabriel, I think it just highlights with these turf horses how much early position really matters. We saw that in the American Oaks. The horse that got out to the front end was able to wire the field. Same thing with Bob and Jackie in the San Gabriel. Again, Bob and Jackie, not a turf horse, but I think getting that forward position really helped him fight off some horses to the wire.
Yeah, the San Gabriel, it looked like a weak race when the nominations list came out. It looked weak when the race was drawn. And then when Hit the Road came out, it became weaker yet. Only 4 horses showed up in the San Gabriel. Bob and Jackie got out there on the front end and slowed it down 49-1, 113-4. And, he showed some resolve through the stretch, holding off Friars Road. Friars Road was the odds-on favorite, and he entered with outstanding turf form, and he had run okay on dirt, but his recent improvement was largely due to the transition from the main track to turf. Now
Mm-hmm.
he was back on dirt for the San Gabriel. So I'm just going to draw a line through this race when Friars Road shows up again, and hopefully he shows up in a 1.25 mile turf race somewhere or farther, because I think he's a pretty decent turf horse. He kind of hung through the lane a little bit. Bob and Jackie fought back. 5-1 on the controlling speed in a 4-horse field was actually a pretty good price on Bob and Jackie. But ultimately, I don't think that there's a whole lot of significance to the San Gabriel. Hopefully, in the case of Hit the Road, who would have been heavily favored had this race stayed on grass, hopefully we see him this weekend in the Joe Hernandez. It's a 6.5 furlong turf sprint down the hill. And Hit the Road's a very good grass miler out in California. Probably should have won the City of Hope Mile. Scratched from the Breeders' Cup Mile with a fever. Scratched from the San Gabriel when it moved to the main track. So Hit the Road is kind of due for some breaks, and we'll see if he gets one this weekend in the Joe Hernandez. As far as the Mathis Mile, which was race number 7, you're right about the point regarding early position. And the race kind of became a parade between pace setter Beyond Brilliant, the favorite, and the ultimate winner, Law Professor. They ran 2-1 all the way around, and Law Professor was able to inch clear Beyond Brilliant. But this was a fast, highly rated race, and I'm not going to poo-poo the performance of either of the top 2 finishers, including the runner-up, Beyond Brilliant. Yes, he lost at 7-5, but he finished 8 lengths clear of third. I suspect that the final time, 37-2, is going to give both these 3-year-olds a good figure. Beyond Brilliant is much better on grass than he is on dirt. As for Law Professor, the winner, I don't think he has a preference. McCarthy believes he could be a little bit better on grass, but he's won a couple races now on dirt. His comeback win recently at Del Mar was outstanding. He was 4 and 5 wide every step of the way and still got the job done. But Law Professor, who is green as grass through the lane, trying to lay in on Beyond Brilliant, this is a lightly raced son of Constitution who has definitely improved since being gelded last spring. And as far as I'm concerned, the sky's the limit on Law Professor. I don't think he really has his mind on what he's supposed to be doing yet. He's, like I said, green through the stretch. So when he finally figures out what he's supposed to do, there's no telling how good this horse is going to be. He's a lightly raced gelding on his way up to bigger and better things on either surface. So McCarthy has a lot of options with regards to Law Professor, a very good horse on either surface. Beyond Brilliant, a very good horse, likely prefers grass.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. This is one of the few races that was taken off the turf that did have some legitimate dirt form, especially among the top two, and including the winner, Law Professor, who you make a lot of good points about him and his prior form and his greenness in the race and the potential for even further upside down the line. And Michael McCarthy, I mean, he almost swept all three of these races. He obviously lost the San Gabriel by a nose, but he almost took all three of these: the American Oaks, the Santa Anita Mathis Mile, and that other one with the horse that he sent out there. Brad, one more race that we should recap among the graded stakes action, that was the San Antonio. Clearly, the biggest upset of the day is Hot Rod Charlie went down to defeat by a nose. You have to just imagine this is a horse that's feeling the effects of a long, hard campaign. He's really danced all the dances. And I mean, I like Doug O'Neill taking a shot with him for one more graded stakes at the end of the year, but it just seemed like maybe there wasn't that much left in the tank for Hot Rod Charlie here.
Yeah, it's really kind of bizarre. I'm not really sure what the point in running Hot Rod Charlie in this race was. And the reason I say that is because plans are for Hot Rod Charlie to ship to Dubai in the middle of January to have a prep over there for the Dubai World Cup and then run in the Dubai World Cup. So the San Antonio, to me, it's like, why even bother? But they ran in the race and he finished second really with no excuse. It was kind of a disappointing performance, honestly, by Hot Rod Charlie. He was the 1-5 favorite. It's clearly the class of the field off a fourth place finish in the Breeders' Cup Classic, but he had every chance to win the race yesterday, but he just didn't finish the job. It's not like he ran poorly, but I think he ran below his typical standards. So now you wonder what's up with Hot Rod Charlie. Now after running the Breeders' Cup, running the San Antonio, now he's going to ship all the way over to the UAE, run once in February, and then the Dubai World Cup. And what are we going to be left with in the second half of the year when Hot Rod Charlie does return to the United States? I don't know. Maybe he's done already. It's hard to say. Not taking anything away from a horse that's won more than $2.5 million, but a disappointing performance by Hot Rod Charlie and an excellent performance by Express Train, who I actually I thought he had a chance to hit the board in the Breeders' Cup Classic in November. But he had to scratch with an injury. He trained well for his comeback, and Victor Espinoza gave him a great ride and timed it perfectly, and he was up to win by a nose. The horse that I bet on was the third place finisher, 8 Rings. I thought that he might be able to shake loose on the lead. He got just enough early pressure from Extra Hope that I think that kind of took a little bit of the starch out of 8 Rings in deep stretch, and he was third across the wire. That's maybe as the best finish he could have hoped for anyway. And 8 Rings he's just a horse. He's not a top grade 1 caliber type older horse. He ran as well as he could under the circumstances. So ultimately, as far as the San Antonio goes, I think the takeaway is that a big question mark over how much improvement, if any, can we expect from Hot Rod Charlie? And I am very skeptical of his chances in the Dubai World Cup prep and even in the Dubai World Cup. So a lot of questions facing Hot Rod Charlie in the months ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of the other side of the coin as regard to our earlier conversation about Flightline. I mean, when you just wait and have a horse hit his peak for every start, even if it comes a few months apart, you're more likely in some cases with a horse like that to get their top performance. But when you keep asking a lot of a horse, having him run every month, keeping that kind of schedule, you don't always get their best performance every time. And I think that's what we saw with Hot Rod Charlie here, definitely progressing off that performance in the Breeders' Cup Classic from last month. I'm glad that you brought it up. I wasn't going to bring up your prior opinion on Express Trade. I actually did scroll over to your DRF picks after this race was over to see if you went for him again. But no, I mean, we're both handicappers. Every race is different. You change your opinions from race to race. But no, Express Train definitely a horse that does do his best running in these mile and the 16th to mile and an eighth races, and he was able to take advantage of Hot Red Charlie not showing up here. But Brad, this race definitely came up on the slow side, just from a time perspective. I mean, nearly going 145 for a mile and the 16th is extremely slow for horses of this caliber. And I mean, the track just did seem to be on the slowish side for much of the day at Santa Anita. And I did just see our DRF colleague, Jay Privman, tweet out that Flightline was assigned a 118 Beyer speed figure for the Malibu. So that leads me to believe the Beyer team probably did mostly play it straight this day. I haven't seen what the Beyer for the La Brea was yet, but a number that high does kind of lead you to believe that a lot of these other races did get lower speed figures. So 118, certainly the highest number of the year that we've seen from any thoroughbred, and definitely makes you very excited about what we're going to see next from Flightline.
Yeah, no question about it. It's also the highest rated Malibu Stakes victory in the 30 years that Beyer speed figures have been published. So that 118, I don't quarrel with it at all. I didn't go quite that high on the numbers that I give, but I certainly don't. I wouldn't debate Beyer with a 118. I mean, that was a runaway smashing victory by Flightline, highly rated, and again, be fun. It's going to be a fun 2022 to watch this good son of Tapit.
Brad, before we move off the Santa Anita card, I just want to quickly get your take on the maiden winner that we saw in race 4 earlier in the day. This was a race for 3-year-olds, so they're nearly 4-year-olds at this point. But Bob Baffert, it's never a surprise when he sends out a horse that looks like a future star, and I think we maybe saw that with Shaz in this race, a horse that was well supported on the tote board and certainly delivered on the track.
Well, when he went out and kind of toyed with a maiden and allowance winner Triple Tap in a team workout on December 19th, anybody who took the time to watch that workout on XBTV would have to come away thinking that Shaz would be a potential standout against maidens. And he only won by a half length, and he was green through the lane. He didn't switch leads, and he was chasing a very fast stablemate. So it was a fast race, I believe. I'll be curious to see what number that race gets as well. But the top two finishers both ran super. Shaz won by a half length over Hopkins, who set the pace, finished more than 4 lengths clear of third, and he's going to be 1-5 next time out in a maiden sprint. But a good win by this son of Uncle Mo. It's curious that it took them this long to make it to the races, and he's been in training since summer. So I don't know what the deal is with Shaz, but a fast win. I'm not going to, coronate him as a future star quite yet, because I like it when a horse is a little bit more professional, when they can switch leads on cue. But like I said, he was on his wrong lead through the lane. He still got the job done, and it was a fast race. So highly rated win, and I'm sure that he definitely has improvement in him. A good, solid career debut for Shaz, and same thing with the runner-up Hopkins. A couple of good, nice 3-year-olds trained by Baffert.
Brad, before I let you go, I just want to quickly get your take on some of these Eclipse Awards, because there are some years when the Eclipse Awards seem like a foregone conclusion as we fill out our ballots. There's not too much debate going on, but this is one of those rare years where it feels like there are quite a few categories. I count 4 or 5 among the horses that you could really have quite a debate about, and you don't have to get out your entire Eclipse Award ballot. I'm sure you haven't quite decided yet. There is still 2 weeks before that they're due, but I just want to get your take on a few of these categories, and as we both are going to be Eclipse Award voters working for the Daily Racing Form. 3-year-old male is going to be one of the most hotly debated. Obviously, there's a new sentimental component to this with the passing of Medina Spirit, but it does seem like this one does come down to essential quality Medina Spirit with maybe a smattering of support for Life is Good. How are you looking at that?
Well, I mean, again, I'm not going to put this in pen yet. I'll pencil it in, but as of right now, I'd be leaning toward Medina Spirit, and I recognize that there's a severe backlash against Medina Spirit with regards to everything that has transpired, with his positive test out of the Derby, with his untimely demise, falling of a heart attack a couple of weeks ago. But I think that just on body of work, I think that he had a championship caliber campaign. So that's the way I'm leaning right now. The other, Essential Quality was an outstanding 3-year-old as well. Life is Good to me. I don't. He didn't do quite enough, in my opinion, get my top vote anyway. So right now I'm leaning toward Medina Spirit over Essential Quality. But again, I could change my mind, but that's where I'm leaning as of December 27th.
Yeah, this was one of the ones that was just basically a coin flip for me. I'm leaning towards Essential Quality, just the overall body of work and the consistency of his campaign and running in a lot of the top races, even in New York, the Travers for the summer. I'm giving him a little bit more credit for that, but it's very close for me. I could go either way, and I'm still deciding. Another one that's going to be hotly debated and kind of some wrinkles were added to it this past weekend was male sprinter. You have Aloha West, who won the Breeders' Cup Sprint in an upset. Often the Breeders' Cup winner does attract plenty of support, but I wonder if that's going to be the case this year with him just barely beating Dr. Scheibel, who seemed like he had the stronger resume coming in there. You had Jackie's Warrior, who it's since been reported came out of that race with a bone chip, so maybe he had an excuse. You got Golden Pal, who won the Turf Sprint. Now Flightline, maybe he's throwing his hat into the ring with that huge performance on Saturday. I mean, this is one that's unusually wide open.
Yeah, it's unusually wide open, and the one this is going to be a really tough call. And it's not to knock any of these; they're all good horses. Aloha West, he won one graded stakes race all year. It happened to be the one that counted most. Flightline scored the fastest sprint figure of the year, winning the Malibu yesterday, but that was his only graded stakes win, and it was in an age-restricted race. Dr. Scheibel, I was prepared to vote for him as the champion sprinter. I'm going to reevaluate in light of what we saw yesterday. I generally do not hold losses against a horse. So if I had a gun to my head today, I might still be voting for Dr. Scheibel. Jackie's Warrior had an outstanding campaign. I mean, he was good, but he never once defeated older horses. And when he showed up as the 1-2 favorite in the Breeders' Cup Sprint, well, he did not show up. He finished sixth and came out of the race with an injury. So, I mean, there's pros and cons to every single one of these horses. And another horse, I guess you'd have to at least consider, although I have a hard time voting for a turf sprinter, but Golden Pal, he had a pretty good campaign. He won the grade 3 quick call. He won the grade 2 Woodford. He won the grade 1 Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. So you'd have to at least give him some consideration. To me, the American Dirt Sprint Championship should be a dirt horse. Right as of right now, and again, I'm not set in stone, but as of right now, I probably would vote for Dr. Scheibel. But I don't think there's any right or wrong answer to the champion sprinter.
Yeah, it's a really tough one for me. I'm leaning towards Jackie's Warrior. I don't feel good about it. I think it's hard to feel great about anybody in this category. I'm viewing that Alan Jerkins that he won as a championship race on the level of the Breeders' Cup Sprint. So I'm giving him a lot of credit for that, even though it was a 3-year-old restricted race. But it's a really close decision. I'm going to have to evaluate a little bit more. Another one in the sprint category that's definitely going to be debated is female sprinter. You've got Gamine and Cece. I know that Gamine was considered a very likely winner of this award coming into the Breeders' Cup Sprint, but it does count for something that she lost that race to Cece, who has had a pretty good campaign. I know she hasn't won grade 1 races outside of the Breeders' Cup, but she has other graded stakes victories to her name, and she's now 1-1 with her record against Gamine. So I could see there being some legitimate support for Cece to win this award.
Yeah, so can I. And yet I'm kind of still leaning toward Gamine. I mean, she was brilliant. Her first 4 starts of the year up until the Breeders' Cup Filly Mare Sprint, she just laid an egg that day with no particular excuse that I could see. I can also see Cece as a potential champion. I mean, she did win the quote championship race, Breeders' Cup Filly Mare Sprint. But CC pretty much took care of her this summer at Saratoga. So a couple of very good fillies. I don't know. Maybe there's a case could be made or an argument that they can be co-champions, because Gamine and Cece both put together outstanding 2021 campaigns. They both won 4 races. They're both fast. They're both grade 1 winners. As of right now, I'd probably lean toward Gamine, but I wouldn't argue with anybody who said that their top choice was Cece.
Yeah, unlike the situation with Latruska, who seems like the champion, even though she lost the Breeders' Cup Distaff, Gamine, her victories, even though they were of the Grade 1 caliber, a lot of them were handed to her, some soft pace situations and not beating the toughest fields. I'm not putting as much stock in her victories as I do for a horse like Latruska, so I'm leaning in the direction of Cece, but it's another one that I don't feel like is set in stone right now. I'm going to take a look at it a bit more. And Brad, the other two categories that I guess you can debate are both of the turf categories, male turf and female turf. The male turf, it seems like there's no truly deserving winner. I guess domestic spending and Yabir are probably going to be the top 2 vote getters. Neither one is a totally satisfying winner of this award, but I mean, I guess if you're more of the American focused mind, you're going to go for domestic spending, and if you're more open to the Europeans, you'll go for Yabir. But it's not like we had a dominant force in that division.
No, we really didn't. But I mean, Yabir was pretty impressive, beating 3-year-olds in the Jockey Club Derby at Belmont. And then his stretch run in the Breeders' Cup Turf was incredible. And so was the weekend put together by Charlie Appleby. Yabir, he's probably my top choice right now. But again, he made 2 starts in the U.S. I don't know. Is that enough to give him the championship in the category? By the same token, domestic spending, he only raced 3 times in the entire year. So there's a lot of different ways to go. This is one of those years where whoever wins or whoever loses, I guess, has some gripes to be made. And whoever does win may not be the most deserving champion that we've ever seen, but it's probably between those two, Yabir and domestic spending.
Yeah, and in the female turf category, it's arguably the same thing with maybe a couple more candidates thrown in. I guess Love's Only You is fairly easy to vote for. If you voted for Yabir, I guess Love's Only You makes a certain amount of sense too. She just has the 1 start in the U.S., but she did beat a pretty strong field in the filly and mare turf. Warlike Goddess, you could argue that maybe she was best in that race, making a wide early move, but she, at the end of the day, just has 1 Grade 1 victory to her name. Santa Barbara, another horse that I guess could attract some support with those 2 Grade 1 victories, one of them against 3-year-olds. Obviously, she was unable to compete at the end of the year, having sadly passed away. But another horse that put together an impressive 2-race U.S. campaign. So another unsatisfying set of options for this award, but multiple ways to go.
Yeah, I agree. Love's Only You, again, it's one of those things. If you start knocking, and say, well, Love's Only You ran only once in the U.S., that's true. She also, was a Group 1 winner in Hong Kong early in spring, and then after the Breeders' Cup, did the same thing. So I guess it depends on how much stock do you put on races that are won outside the country, because I think that championships, these are, in my opinion anyway, supposed to be U.S. championships. Maybe winning the Breeders' Cup Filly Mare Turf is enough for Love's Only You. She might get my top vote. I agree with what you said about Warlike Goddess. I mean, she had a great season in the Midwest and the East Coast. Probably not the greatest ride in the Breeders' Cup Filly Mare turf race. She made a premature move, made the lead, and then got worn down. But she had an outstanding campaign as well. So if anybody voted for Warlike Goddess, I would not quarrel with that vote either.
Yeah, and the human awards this year seem pretty straightforward. I would imagine that the trainer, jockey, and owner categories, Brad Cox, Joel Rosario, and Godolphin are likely to win. I don't have much of an argument with that. I'd be happy to see Joel Rosario get the award. It's rare that you see a champion jockey actually compete at meets at all of the major racing circuits, and he did that this year, doing a Santa Anita meet, a Churchill meet, competing at Saratoga, another New York tracks. I mean, he's really covered all his bases, a slew of graded stakes victories, and I thought he was arguably deserving to win this award last year, and I think that he's sewn it up this year, so happy to vote for him.
Yeah, I agree with you there, David. I think that Joel Rosario would be a deserving, Eclipse winning jockey. And I also agree with Brad Cox. I mean, he's the trainer of the likely horse of the year, trained Essential Quality, who had an outstanding campaign, and Cox has been dynamite, all year in virtually every single division. As far as owner of the year goes, that is a category that I often take a pass on because I'm just not really comfortable with what owner of the year means and what it represents. Is it the owner of the best horse, the owner of the deepest stable, the owner of the whoever won the most grade one? So that's a category that I'm kind of embarrassed to admit. I often abstain from voting because I'm just not comfortable making a vote for owner of the year because I'm just not sure what it actually represents.
Yeah, the criteria for a lot of these awards, frankly, is not that clear, and you have to make some leaps of judgment to decide what they mean to you. And I get not being totally comfortable doing that in some of these categories. Breeder for a lot of people was the same thing. So you have to kind of set your own criteria for these. I mean, I have to look at it a bit more. I mean, the numbers for Godolphin absolutely just jump out at you this year. They obviously have an embarrassment of riches in their stable, and especially over in Europe, a lot of those impressive U.S. numbers are from Charlie Appleby shipping horses over. I believe he has 8 Grade 1 victories, those being all of his graded stakes races in the U.S. this year. So he definitely bolsters the Dolphins' numbers there. Well, Brad, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking about some of the Santa Anita action and these Eclipse Award opinions. It's always kind of an exciting time at the end of the year with Santa Anita starting up and some of the other winter tracks. A lot of promise. You see some 3-year-olds, or I should say 2-year-olds turning 3 coming out. So I always like when the winter racing starts up. It's kind of a slower time in racing news and racing action, but you do see a lot of horses you can get excited about.
Well, there's no doubt about it. And we also see 3-year-olds who just improve overnight. One of the, kind of clouds that's hanging over California racing is you typically winter at Santa Anita is all about the developing 3-year-olds on the road toward the Kentucky Derby. We all know who has the deepest stable of 3-year-olds in California, and that's Bob Baffert. Unfortunately, as of today, no Bob Baffert trainee is eligible to run in the Kentucky Derby. So it's going to, put the significance of some of these 3-year-old stakes races this winter at Santa Anita is going to be somewhat tempered due to the situation with Baffert. But it is a fun time of year. We're going to see some developing 3-year-old fillies, developing 3-year-old colts. And, there's a big year to look forward to. We got Flightline. How far can he carry his speed? So plenty to look forward in 2022, no doubt about it.
Yeah, Brad, I really appreciate you coming on to talk with me today. Maybe I'll have you back at some point in the future with Craig, but I really appreciate you making the time. Thanks for coming on.
I look forward to it, David. Thanks for having me.
Everybody, remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcasts, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. That's it for today. I'll be back with another podcast this Friday, handicapping some weekend racing. So stay tuned for that TimeformUS forecast coming out on Friday. Thanks for listening, everybody.